Okay, wonderful. My name is Joseph Houseal. I'm the Director of Core of Culture, and I'm here today interviewing Scott Park Phillips with 3 questions and some added ones. Scott Park Phillips is a martial artist and dancer, an anthropologist, a somatic historian, and the author of 2 books. The first, Possible Origins, A Cultural History of Chinese Martial Arts, Theater, and Religion. And the second, a follow-up book called Tai Chi, Baguazhang, and the Golden Elixir, Internal Martial Arts Before the Boxer Uprising. Like probably many others, I first became aware of Scott Park Phillips when I bought his books and read them while I was looking for other books. I admire Scott a lot because he finds language, he coins language, he uses language to talk about things that are difficult to talk about. And that includes, for me, movement traditions. Whether you're talking about classical ballet or kung fu, a movement tradition, something that passes through time, is much different thing to talk about than art or architecture that lasts sort of in time and lasts through time as a stationary thing. That makes it more difficult to talk about. Now, if the movement tradition includes things like mind control, or includes things like an altering the state of consciousness, altering the mind-body complex, it becomes additionally even more difficult to talk about. And some traditions might have ways to talk about it traditionally that could be poetical or metaphoric or symbolic. And then you need to know how to interpret those words. And of course, there's always the element of learning what your teacher taught you. The whole question of transmission is its own subject. Well, Scott has found a way to discuss history and movement traditions, the history of movement traditions, and find a new language to do it that is both general and specialist, and uses a vast array of resource material that he cites and annotates beautifully in his books that goes from his own experience as a student and a teacher, his experience as a martial artist and dancer, but his upbringing with a bunch of anthropologists, and also his research into scholarly writing and to YouTube videos of other practitioners and the popularity and the practice of martial arts, which is a phenomena by any accounts. In almost every era of martial arts is a type of social phenomena. So it is my introduction to why I'm very excited to be talking with Scott today. And Scott, thank you very much for agreeing to talk with me.
Thank you for that lovely introduction as well. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome. Well, let me start off with my first question. It is about a term that you use that some of the listeners might know from other sources. The term golden elixir is a central concept in the theory you put forward about martial arts in China during a period that is overlooked, maybe it's erased, perhaps intentionally relegated to be forgotten or not discussed, a period from the late 19th century until the Boxer Uprising. The term golden elixir is used often and variously in traditional Taoist writings concerning meditation and neidan, or internal visualization. Could you please say something about your choice of this term golden elixir? Indeed, it's in the title of your second book, and something about its earlier traditional usages and how your use of the term is similar and dissimilar to how some people might already have experienced or encountered the term golden elixir.
Okay, I'm going to jump right in. So the term golden elixir is a translation of the Chinese term jindan, which refers to jin is gold and dan is cinnabar. And so it's you know, it could also be translated as alchemy, because it, you know, which is the Arabic term, or there's Sanskrit terms for this as well, and that basic idea that there is a transformation from a common substance to a refined substance or a super valuable substance. And that the term itself refers to something happening to one's being, one's, you could say one's self, spirit, something like that. Or and to a kind of chemistry process, actually doing chemistry, right? Outside with metallurgy, you might say metallurgy. And that these were done simultaneously in certain eras, where someone would actually be doing some kind of metallurgy with a bellows while doing a breathing technique and visualizations. And then they would look, and the two would be feedback for each other. And this is where the term Neidan comes from. It's referring to the inner elixir versus the outer elixir, the one you're doing. But there's a very long period of history here. So those terms are swirling in different directions and having different meanings. In the 20th century, especially the second half of the 20th century, Neidan has almost been a translation for the English term meditation, translating it into Chinese. And so scholars have chosen it, even when Jindan is the correct term. Largely because they, and I don't want to be too generalized about scholars, but it's a common error to think that Jindan is something inner, meaning something you actually do in your body, in your physical body, and there's an error there. So this is where these terms get a little bit messed up. That Neidan is an older term, but it's come to mean a sort of general meditation, and which has had the function of obscuring the term Jindan in English. So that's one of the reasons why I chose it. But let's go back to earlier, because Taoism, which is the main proponent of this idea of the Golden Elixir, its most sacred book is called the Dao De Jing, the Dao De Jing. And the very term there, Jing means classic, referring to the warp and woof of a piece of fabric, actually. And Dao is a term which is beyond description, or describable and undescribable. It's always this completely beyond human comprehension and also comprehensible. Like it's always this bigger than anything you can imagine and smaller and more practical than anything you can imagine. Sort of something always in this realm that Tao defies definition, but is also something we have a constant experience of.
May I ask you just a point of clarity?
Yeah.
It's very interesting to notice that scholars have used Jindan and used meditation as a convenient, comfortable Western word that lets you keep reading. If I get meditation, I kind of got St. Francis of Assisi or something, we'll just keep going.
Yeah.
But Jindan does mean something else more akin to alchemy. I do the production of an elixir. Now, you mentioned, the internal and external. I've been under the assumption reading Taoist texts that they're indeed both. And one of the issues in understanding alchemy is that there was, in fact, a physical, metallurgical and substantial with substances killed a few emperors taking these, but then also it became metaphoric for a way to describe an internal meditation or visualization process where the design of the internal visualization technique is to produce an elixir, not with external substances, but with internal mental visualizations and activities. So that it actually, over as you say, a very long span of time, it came to mean something else. So this is why I'm wondering, in your use of the word Jindan as golden elixir, why, if in fact it changed from a real physical act to a metaphor for internal techniques that are supposed to have a physiological result, which makes it physical. And then maybe it's used in a different way now as you're discussing aspects of historical evolution. So I'm just wondering if I've got that right or if that needs more clarity.
Oh no, that's right. But let's pull that apart. So I just defined Dao, right? And then De is the other half of the title. So Dao De Jing. De And so this is the book by Lao Tzu. It's the sort of the character who started it. I recently learned, by the way, that Lao Tzu has a daughter named Gigi. Maybe we can talk about that at the end. Anyway,
there's a movie about her.
Yeah. So De is the unique sort of self version of Tao. That is, you know, you looking out experience of Tao. It's often translated as virtue or your original unique virtue, something
Integrity.
like that. What's that?
Integrity.
Integrity. Also, your integrity or the quality of integrity, or your sometimes even nature. We get it into English as nature, and it's your original being, something like that. We don't have quite. It's a very important word. It's a very key word. We don't have a quite direct translation, and so what the Dao De Jing is about is the relationship between De and Tao, right? And that this is actually so the Dao De Jing actually is used constantly throughout the history.
I've never heard it explained that way. It's very simple and makes so much sense.
The Golden Elixir is the Dao De Jing is used constantly to explain the Dao De Jing is used constantly to explain Jindan, the Golden Elixir, throughout Chinese history, into the present, when right now we're still in Chinese history, and I'm doing it. And so that's pointing to the continuity there. So the Dao De Jing does this one by pointing to what happens when you drop all concept, when you drop all conception or aggression. This is what this term wu wei. When all aggression is dropped, something is still there, and it's your original nature, and it has integrity. It connects you to everything. This is sometimes called xian, or immortality, and has an infinite number of different expressions and jokes and metaphors and deep, crazy ideas and really intellectually specific ideas. It spins off to.
Does this imply a transformative potential to that state of basic consciousness and being, that when the aggression and the concepts are gone and you're left with something, you've got this palette, you've got this canvas for infinite potential transformation?
So the Dao De Jing refers to it as a baby who has not yet smiled, or a river returning to the ocean, or a block of wood that has not yet been carved, or raw silk. It's always something that you get to without effort, that has infinite potential, or that kind of thing that is, and if there is sort of a philosophy of the Lao Tzu, it's a very practical kinesthetic philosophy, which is that humans have 3 or 4 problems. One is we use words. One is we use our arms to carry stuff. Another is we walk on sticks, stiff legs upright. Another is that our imagination, gets ahead of itself, and we get lost in fantasy or something, this kind of thing. So, all right, that's a little bit about the Dao De Jing. So then what happens is you get Taoism developing as a religion. And one of the key things that happens, because Chinese culture is already full of ritual, and rituals about the unseen world of gods and ghosts and deities. And you get this, and to simplify something very, very large, the country was run in a sense by religious organization throughout every dynasty, and Taoist appeared as a kind of a way of governing the unseen world that holds.
One of the points you make in your book, just to interject, was that rituals provide order.
Yeah, exactly.
And rituals provided order to society, often in places when they were the only people providing order to society.
So the Golden Elixir, this practice of Wu Wei that connects you to all things, is the foundational idea behind ritual. And the practice of the Golden Elixir becomes a formalized version of it with its own set of vocabulary. The most primary vocabulary are Jing, Qi, and Shen, which we come into problems because scholars keep trying to translate these using the same terminology across different realms, across medicine and whatever. And so Jing, for instance, gets translated as sperm, which I would argue it most of the time it refers to that which is reproducible or which reproduces itself. So we're talking about life forms like
vitality. Yeah.
This is my Jing, the thing you can touch.
Mm-hmm. Physical matter. Yeah.
A physical matter is close. Yeah, it's close. And then
vitality,
Qi.
Is vitality a good one?
Well, I don't think so. It's but it's an adjective. So your Jing is great. You have vitality, right? Your integrity, right? The de of your Jing is there. Then you'll have vitality. But vitality is a better description of Qi. So Qi is what animates Jing. So if you were to separate Qi from Jing, you just have my dead body, there, just be the body, right? With nothing moving it. So when you go into stillness, as you do in ritual and as you do in meditation, what actually happens is the Qi floats off and the Jing becomes still. So Qi and Jing distill from each other. Qi here being what animates us, because it's not needed to move you around. So it floats off. Now, people might say, Scott, that doesn't sound very scientific. And I say, well, actually, this is how we evolved. This is actually universal.
Can I just ask a question here? Is part of what you're implying here is that in order to even discuss this, we have to get comfortable with ancient words having more than one meaning in different contexts?
There might be another way in. I'm not going to insist that, but yeah, the bigger subject is going to really require that. Yes. Yeah. Good question. So let me spin ahead and we can just come back and see if I left something out, right? Because I've only really got us to about the 3rd century, where you're doing these rituals while you're doing visualization practices. And the visualization practices, I didn't really get to that. The visualization is called Shen, or often translated spirit or deity, because in the Taoist concept, deities are visualizations. And there isn't a distinction made between something you actively visualize and something that's spontaneously visualized. So that's why it can cover the category of God. And so you have Shen, which I often, if I'm talking to people who are more scientifically oriented, I say it's your spatial imagination. It's the function of your imagination which senses space, which knows what's inside the cake, what's underneath the floor, what's behind the next corner. That part of your imagination, which is very practical or simpler. Evolutionarily, it was an earlier form of your evolution, we might argue, your imagination. So Shen is out there, and this is how you get the egg. You have the physical body, which is the yolk. You have the Qi, which is just around it, and you have the Shen. Now, normally you have any desire or intent or aggression, Shen pushes the Qi inside, and you're active again. So the Golden Elixir practice is actually to keep this distillation of Jing and Qi while in motion. And you do that by moving space first, which I call a reversal of perception action. And I might add, the Dao De Jing is constantly talking about this reversal. This reversal of turning things inside out or upside down, something that is, making the people, not making the people enlightened, but making them stupid. That it's constantly doing this game of reversals. And because I think you'll really relate to this. If I have to teach you something cognitively, right? I'm going to give it to you in some kind of order where you understand the order we're going in. And it has a linearity to it, maybe a laterality to it. You may be some lateral thing, like you get this, okay, now get this, right? Sometimes cognitively you'll move laterally too, but
it certainly would allow a linear expression of it. Whatever it is, the concept would be expressed in a linear way.
Right. And so, but the Chinese term for not knowing, zhi, is which the Dao De Jing is constantly discussing, also refers to the felt experience, or you could say the kinesthetic type of knowing. And with kinesthetic knowing is where it's a whole different situation, where I'm going to say to you, hey, there's this intangible thing, and I want you to get a tangible experience of it, so we can move to the next thing and reverse it. And then we're going to be doing the opposite. And this is every day. If you work in the kinesthetic realm, this type of kinesthetic logic is normal. It's like, hey, we were working on this show and it just gelled, man. It just gelled. Like, what does that mean? Right. That's not a linear concept, right. But everybody knows what you mean, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's
I feel though that this is the kind of knowledge that movement practitioners have intuitively, and I think also it's why people that don't possess or have actualized that type of awareness in themselves are in a way threatened by it, because it's a kind of knowledge. And I think a lot of academics are used to getting some knowledge and accumulating knowledge and acquiring knowledge. And knowledge is something you get rather than knowledge is something you have. And so I think part of the challenge for movement practitioners in connection with scholars or scientists or others is to communicate that this is actually a kind of knowledge. And one of the reasons I like your books and this discussion is it helps to find language to make those connections meaningfully, so that others that may not have the same gift for movement, gift for kinesthetic awareness, spatial imagination, that there is considered something fanciful rather than something actual. So I think what you're saying about this felt experience as being real and something you don't need to communicate to the dance company if they got it right. Everybody already knows it was a good rehearsal, but trying to help other people understand that multi-dimensional reality, if I can call it that, is really one of the things I think you do very well in your books.
Thank you so much. You remind me of a funny story, which I was with. It was a workshop, but I was going to visit one of my older teachers, George Hsu, and there were a bunch of students around, and he was explaining something, and everyone was having trouble understanding what he was saying, and showing. He's showing it, you're feeling it, you're seeing it, and still no one's getting it. And I said, and I said to him in front of everyone, I said, I know what you're teaching right now is wrong. And before he could respond, all the other students started getting mad at me. They're like, "What are you saying? That's insulting the teacher." And da da da. And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, 6 months ago you were saying something completely different, and 6 months before that you were saying something completely different, and 6 months before that is actually the opposite of what you just said. A year later, and there's no chance that in 6 months you're going to be saying the same thing." And he said, "That's right. You're right." Exactly. And everyone was like, "What? Aren't you insulted by that?" That is the nature of kinesthetic learning, especially when you study with a teacher who is himself learning.
Well, it's interesting too. I'm sure you've experienced this where an Asian teacher, Chinese teacher, or someone from Taiwan, or would come to the United States, stand on the side of a dojo, and at the end go, "No Tai Chi," or "No Kung Fu,"
which is a compliment, but nobody gets that, right?
And so but this is, I think, part of what interests me is trying to enable these conversations, as you have done, bridging history and practice, which can be considered. We'll get to that in our next question. So back to the Golden Elixir. You've given a lovely history and connected it to the Dao De Jing, which was beautifully done, by the way, connected to actual physical metallurgical alchemy with substances, to its use as a way to understand an internal technique, to something even beyond that, among bodies, not just within a body, but among bodies. And so I guess what I want to ask about using the term golden elixir, as opposed to alchemy, as opposed to meditation, as it's used in these different disciplines to approximate something other than substances fused in a fire, that it still retains something essential in its meaning, that perhaps its application varies, but would you suggest that the fundamental meaning remains the same, that there is something inherently the same in the different uses of it?
Absolutely. I'm all about seeing the continuity here, because because the Dao De Jing is really talking about this, even if it does it in a very general way, without, it uses the term Jing, but it doesn't use those terms Jing, Qi, and Shan to describe the elixir directly, right, for instance, but it does it much more abstractly. But people through the generations who do the practice can see it in the Dao De Jing. But let me just sort of fill in, because there's so much, but I think I can sketch it. So you have this Taoist ritual, right? And there's multiple people doing it, or it can be done solo. There's both things. Both people visualizing simultaneously. And so there's all sorts of elements of this ritual which are external, which are the room, the altar, how things are done, why they're done, who they're done for. There's also what you're visualizing. And what you're visualizing, it can vary quite a lot, but it's based on having developed relationships with the deities as a kind of puppet master. So you visualize the deity in front of you and its infinite attributes, and then it goes above you, and then you become it. This takes quite a bit of time, and then you store it in a cavity of infinite emptiness in your body. And you do this with 18 different deities, or nine pairs. And then when you do ritual, they go to the outside, and each of them is visual. So your body is now completely empty, which I argue is the basis for internal martial arts. And they're out there, and you're visualizing them. You've reversed the order of perception action. You're visualizing them commanding armies, or something else sometimes, but armies for mass exorcisms that are the purpose for which is order and unity. So this is a practice, right, which is a little bit distant from our normal everyday life, but was a big part of what they were doing. So what happens then, you jump ahead 800 years, and this practice, people who have this practice, 20 years in their bodies, start doing movement practices. And there's this thing called Douyin, or Dao Yin, usually we say in English, and which is, a little bit yoga-like, except it doesn't involve stretching, really. It's about finding the wildness, the limits of what your body can do, what you can express, right? And so a lot of it is based on animal explorations, and this, it's really, and so in it often gets, the way I translate it is Dao, in this character for Dao, refers to it has the character for Dao for the limitlessness, and then the character for inch under it. So it means to take absolutely everything and just tweak it a little bit. and then the other character, in, means to open a bow. So people often translate it as draw or pull, but it doesn't refer to that. It refers to the potential energy of emptiness, that's there. And that's what you're cultivating in Douyin. And it's this practice, right, is inseparable. Originally, it may have been separable, but by the 12th century, it's inseparable from the Golden Elixir. Just like the Golden Elixir is inseparable from sitting in stillness. It's a base program.
Just to interject, so would you say then at this point the Golden Elixir, Jin Dan, you would say the Golden Elixir is a technique, is a method for achieving or resulting in this condition of awareness that you're talking about, this plasticity of being, that the Golden Elixir would then be both a technique and a condition?
Yeah, this is where people get lost, especially scholars, because it looks like a method. It keeps looking like a method, especially when you look at it in some sort of historical terms on a piece of paper. Or if I say, hey, come to my Golden Elixir class, it looks like a method, but it's, and there's a method there, but the method is always subordinate to your view. The view is established by the Dao De Jing. The view is about what the human relationship is to nature, and it must be discovered. It cannot be forced. The Golden Elixir will not rise by force. It will not come into being by force.
It's self-arising.
It's self-arising. You must drop your aggression. And I'm calling this aggression but there might be another way.
Anything other than Wu Wei, anything beyond Wu Wei.
I like to joke, if you've ever seen the film with Vin Diesel called Triple X, where the plot is basically that anything that happens to him, he just adds more aggression. No matter what happens, he just increases the aggression, and it works for him. And so a god could do that. I don't think humans can pull that off, but Vin Diesel did in the movie. So I don't want to say that I'm not trying to make non-aggression some kind of perfect.
No, let's take it back to your idea of not a method, more a view.
Exactly.
More a view, not a method, more a view. And is that a way of saying too, it's both a method and a view. It's a method until the view is awake, and then you don't need the method. And then the method isn't that important once you have to attain the view. So it's a view. Now, for scholars, and I'm diverting a little bit, for scholars, is view then a subjective thing brought forward? Can you reify view so that we're all talking about the same thing when we talk about view? I'm really thinking about my own project around the Vajradhatu. I've discussed the Vajradhatu, and some will say, what's the Vajradhatu? It's the diamond sphere that we all have. And so it's the view. It's a cosmological, internal, external, encompassing view. So I just wonder, view, state of being, method, does it help when you use all those words together to talk about it with other people, to be able to connect it with other more tangible things? Or
so you have view, method, and fruition. That's the couple. That's the thing. And so view suggests a method, method produces fruition, fruition verifies the view, right? I'll say it again. View inspires the method, method produces fruition, fruition verifies the view.
That's very similar to the structure of deity visualization in Buddhism.
Yeah, or Dzogchen. Is it Dzogchen, basic Dzogchen idea? Yes. And they even use the word Dzogchen in Chinese, great perfection.
I didn't know that.
My light, I just got brighter here.
No, I thought it was just your view was glowing.
So what scholars are often looking, my opinion, this is really, I'd like to have the conversation with scholars. I'm not trying to
me too. And this is why I really wanted to look for you to help frame that, even for me, but for also others, because I think you've begun to do that with your use of language in your books. And even to say author, there's an author, great, I can refer you to a book. That's a very helpful thing to refer somebody to a book. But again, I think going back to these terms that we're at now in the 12th century, looking at various uses of these terms and understanding, method might be an oversimplification and even an incorrect term, and view is a better term to understand what Golden Elixir is as we move through history.
Yes. Okay. But to answer the scholar's question, they tend to be looking at methods and hearing when they're reading a description of a method usually also describes its fruition. If it's a serious, in the Taoist, if we're talking about the Taoist canon's description of the Golden Elixir, for instance, and there's a lot of them, there's a lot of these texts that describe it. And they'll often say there are 3 methods or 9 methods, right? And each one has a slightly different fruition. But the terms for the fruition, or the descriptions of the fruition, are themselves almost incomprehensible. So as a continuity practitioner, as a practitioner, I look at these things and I go, well, obviously, this person was a master of the Golden Elixir and had a lot of friends who practiced it differently, friends or students or teachers who had slightly different versions, and he kind of summarizing them here, you know. But there's actually just one practice, and but scholars say, no, look at all the different fruition. And I'm like, yeah, everybody's fruition's different.
But does this, if I may, does this go, and I'm jumping a little bit to our next interview, because I've got another whole set of questions for you, but the next interview about, what's transmitted, and why your teacher, well, he's every 6 months, he teaches something else. I love that. Because in fact, the one thing you can't transmit is the Golden Elixir. You can't transmit it. You've got to actualize it. So all you can do is, hit people on the head with a stick while they're meditating until they do it. Or maybe the only way to get the result is to not teach it the same way. I'm just wondering where you think about that, and what makes Golden Elixir a useful term in that sense, and that it is not a technique. It's a result.
Yeah, I'm going to dodge that question slightly by going back to sort of my overview, which is that Daoyin, right? Daoyin happens, right? And this Daoyin mixed with the Golden Elixir goes to Shaolin Temple, like where they're practicing Chan meditation, right? And gets turned into this fighting art called Shaolin. So the Golden Elixir passes through Daoyin, and ends up in Shaolin.
In Buddhism. In Buddhism.
In Buddhist Shaolin, yes. Yeah, well, of course, this is Chan Buddhism, which is constructed on Taoist terminology to begin with. So is it Buddhism or Taoism? It's Buddhism, but it's got a lot of Taoism in it.
Yeah. Well, they called themselves Buddhists anyway.
Yeah, and then the Golden Elixir becomes just sort of, incorporated into what's often called esoteric Buddhism or tantric Buddhism, which is perhaps some of it, I'm certain some of it came from India in that sense. It's been moving around. So then you have, so it appears now in martial arts, right? And it becomes because it's been associated with becoming an immortal. And I could talk about being an immortal a little bit. It goes into the theater as what happens whenever you get in a fight. If you want to live, you got to be an immortal. You got to be, the best fighters all have some Golden Elixir elements built into them, often very directly. They're Golden Elixir practitioners, the best fighters in the theater. Starting really in the 1300s, certainly by the mid 1400s, the dominant explanation for why someone is a great fighter is that they're a practitioner of the Golden Elixir. And everybody knows this. This is not debatable. It's just that it hasn't filtered through all different categories of Western thinking.
Correct.
And so,
or even one or two.
Right. Yeah. So the Golden Elixir is there, right? And as this thing, and let me say something about what immortal is. So this term xian, which the character is for, if you just look at the character, is a mountain with a man. So it's like a mountain man or something. It doesn't mean anything really, but it's xian could mean you live forever. It could mean that you live a long time. It could mean
the heavens.
Yeah, that you get a job in heaven. An appointment in the heavenly empire. There's lots of funny ones, like the Johnson Fung. Zhang Daoling, the founder of religious Taoism, rose up in broad daylight with his dogs and chickens. You just see the dogs and chickens starting to float, and he goes up. Like, that's how he became an immortal. Or there's another one that I love, which is a guy was like, okay, after I die, check my tomb, okay? In like 3 weeks, check my tomb, okay? They open it up, and there's a sword in there. Like, oh man, he turned into a sword, you know, and that's his immortal, right? These are called hagiographies.
But this is exactly how the Virgin Mary goes into heaven. She floats up.
And yeah. So and then Gohong was one of the most important characters in the literary development of Golden Elixir studies, you could say, Gohong, and medicine as well. He sent the carriage back empty. It's like he got in an Uber and he went to the wilderness, and then he just sent the Uber back. And that's how he became an immortal.
There's your proof. Yeah.
So it's like, and that's a common one, actually. It's called, you know, they asked what happened to him. Well, he sent the carriage back empty. Whoa. So
dissolved into light is a Buddhist one, you know, dissolved into all that was left was the clothes and the shoes, and, you know, and a rainbow light that went the other way.
A key thing about this thing as literature, right? What I'm talking about is the religious literature, but now I'm talking about theatrical literature, because they merge and they cross each other and they merge. And so because these hagiographies are always unique. There's, even if they both sent the carriage back empty, there's a difference in the stories.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so, and that's actually just because they each have a unique De, right? And their De is related to Tao in a unique way. And this idea gets infused into acting training, and the physicality, which is really a dance tradition, right, of Chinese opera. It becomes infused with the Golden Elixir. And we don't know exactly how it happened, but the reality is that, you know, 10-year-olds are memorizing these scripts in which they're reciting Golden Elixir poetry. I mean, it absolutely permeates the theatrical world. So there's no way they weren't familiar enough with it. It probably was just self-arising. Again, you have this conception, you have this view. If you get the view and you drop your aggression, it's going to start happening. Oh, I have a great example of like it's spontaneously arising long before I heard of the Golden Elixir. You know, I was doing a dance rehearsal. I was doing dance rehearsal, and we rehearsed this piece over and over and over, right? So I really, really know it, right? Because I wasn't the guy having the problem, right? But I'm in the group, so we're doing it over and over. I really know this piece really well. And then we do a show, you know, with a live audience, so the intensity gets turned up, right? A lot of intensity. And I'm in like the 6th or 7th show, and I'm doing the same piece, right? And my job isn't that big, and I'm watching it from the outside. Like I'm watching myself dance because I know where everybody is on stage. And if you think about it, well, that's my imagination constructed it, right?
No, that actually is something that is a longtime dance critic, and talking to other critics, famous dancers repeat this story not infrequently. And it's usually when they're doing something really super physical, like a series of really complicated jumps. And they're like, I was in the audience watching myself do it. It's happened to me once. So these are the kinds of things that are fascinating, but difficult to share with scholars in the scholarly context. But there's lots of anecdotal evidence about this. This is not a one-off thing. It's not a kooky thing. It's a rather well-known phenomena among people who are really good at movement practices. I've never heard a martial artist say it, but you were talking about it during a dance performance, which is the only time I've heard of it. But in the Japanese No theater, one of their fundamental techniques is that you're always supposed to see yourself from the back. And that's like a plie. You just always do it. It's not a big deal. It's a basic facet of movement. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. Back to the Golden Elixir and moving outside yourself and immortality and the notion of the symbolic actualized immortal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so my point here is that it becomes infused in the actor training. And then, I mean, to sort of sum it up, what happens is those things are all, martial arts is then mixed in with all of these things. And so I describe, there's actually a really interesting new piece of research I can actually share right now, about Mark Muhlenfeld was discussing a cult, a Taoist cult in Hunan, in which the cult starts in maybe the 10th or 12th century, and it's about a local militia leader who dies fighting bandits, and he organizes this region into, you know, to defend itself, basically. And so they make him a deity because he's died on the battlefield. He can't be worshipped at the family altar, so he's a kind of wandering ghost, so they have to feed him. That's just the basic Chinese religion to stop future violence from happening. This is a fundamental order creation cosmology of Chinese religion. So they create this deity. And so he's talking about all of the different elements that are Taoist. And then he says, look, by the way, we have 3 of these, and I even bought one. Okay. So I have this deity. It was closed in the 1800s. It was sealed, and I opened it up, and we've opened up the other ones. They're all filled with talismans. Okay. And each of these talismans, if you understand how talismans are written, they're written from the Golden Elixir itself. You cultivate the Golden Elixir, and so that you can infuse the drawing you're doing. You only do calligraphy this way. You don't do it on a flat piece of paper. You do it upwards, and you're putting your body in your chi body into this thing as you are visualizing yourself, in this case, being a specific deity. So you actually are not yourself in a sense. You are a particular, and these are all martial deities. These are all fighters.
Would you call this a kind of trance writing? Is that a fair word, or a word that confuses?
I'm pretty comfortable with the word trance, but it gets murky. Trance often means you don't know what you're doing.
Correct. So Zayami said the same thing in No. He wanted No to be a trance-like state, because trance was something you couldn't work with musicians.
Yeah. But I think that you have to be Golden Elixir, you could say is a category of trance, or even the study of trance. This would be a fair description, but it's a lot more than that, or it's very specific. But anyway, you get this deity infused, right? So it's a representation of the body of the god. And you put this body of the god in the other god, and then you do another. So there are hundreds of them, or 100 of these, and they all represent the order of the militia. And because the militia itself every member of the militia is invoking these deities for the fight. They're not fighting as themselves. They're fighting with the power, either with the power of the deities visualized, or as themselves in a kind of possessed state, possessed by the gods. As in the boxer Uprising.
When we were working in Bhutan, where the monks in Bhutan, where the national protective deities are still revered as protective deities because Bhutan hasn't been conquered. So there's a visceral belief in these deities. But when the monks of the main royal Zong monastery do their annual performance, they go through a series of visualizations led by the head monk. And one is abstract. Guru Rinpoche is an abstract picture. Then it's all the wrathful deities. Then before you dance, he says, you're this one, you're that one, you're this one, you're that one. It's just what you're describing. And they're not fighting, but it's most definitely a protective force field they're creating. And it's exactly as you describe. And I've never heard anybody else ever say that before. That's really fascinating.
And so that's what a martial art is you actually are the deity, and then you become each of the deities one by one that are inside of you, so that you have the power as that fighter deity, plus all the other fighter deities that you just invoked, some of which are somewhat generic, like thunder gods, and you invoke them all. And that's what, when you're doing a Tai Chi form, I'm pretty sure now that I have this particular explanation, pretty sure that's what it is. It fits. Why would you be miming all these different things? And it absolves me as the studier of needing to have a single narrative tie every movement in the form together to tell a story. You're simply moving from one deity being invoked to the next.
Now, would you say then that one of the purposes of your research and your two books is to correct an erroneous notion among particularly Western martial arts practitioners that have learned it sincerely, but they learned a version of it that was sanitized, it was YMCAized, and so they lost this other understanding that a lot of the contemporary world would call superstitious, and they lost understanding that really is the empowering agent of and the purpose. Is this one of the reasons why you use this term to bring forward an understanding of history, as to sort of replace a missing piece in contemporary martial arts as they've been received in the West?
Yes. I think you got it. I mean, yeah, for sure. Okay, so you're kind of pointing to this thing I call the YMCA consensus, which is that after the Boxer Uprising, so the Boxer Uprising itself is a phenomenon like this, and it's a chaotic war that's anti-Christian, and the fighters in it, the Chinese fighters, do rituals to be possessed by local deities, various different sorts of deities that are all fighters, and they're all from opera, and so that's where they and they're not. I want to make a distinction here. They're everywhere you go in China. There's amateur opera. Well, we call it amateur opera, but you could also there's also just processional movement, religious theatrical traditions, and they're all based on the martial performativity. They're martial dances, you could say, or they're martial expressions of deities, and they very often involve possessed states. Possessed by the deity, but they don't always. There are many different types of you could call them trances that are used. There are trance experts who are this at the local level, and so this is what the Boxer Uprising is people fighting like this, and they believed that they were invulnerable to bullets. They had a kind of golden bell. It was, in fact, the Golden Elixir, or a version of the Golden Elixir, that was making them invulnerable. So after the Boxers lost, right?
To guns, to point out, to guns, correct?
To guns, yeah. And to better organization. There was a reckoning within Chinese culture that about why they lost, and it was a kind of national humiliation. In fact, the thing that unified China as the Chinese empire fell, the Qing dynasty fell, was their humiliation, you could say. It's a kind of dark thought. But
no, it's very much in a country that values standing in face, and absolutely.
Yeah, and there was a war, really a 40-year war on martial arts, religion, and theater, because these three, what we think of as separate institutions, were a single institution. And that institution, which had many different facets, was under attack. And the way it survived was by splitting into three to represent, in a sense, the Western ideals of theater. Martial arts, we had boxing, we had wrestling, we had these things. So they kind of created this thing they call a pure fighting martial art. That was the idea, and that's really 20th century. That's really a result of this war. And the war, like I said, it was a 40-year maybe civil war, but it was a chaotic war. There were a local authority would destroy a temple and there would be a riot. That kind of thing. It wasn't a guns blazing war. It was a continuous war about. In order to get rid of, so 500,000 temples were destroyed between 1901 and 1940. And that's a lot of temples to be destroyed. And that's really what we know about, right? And martial arts in that sense was pulled apart from its historical origins. Things like the Golden Elixir were themselves reorganized into what we call modern Taoists. Or there's a book by Liu Shun called Taoist Moderns, where they were trying to just peel off the Golden Elixir from everything else and deal with it just as a pure thing. Separate from all of its ritual traditions and its martial traditions and all that, in order to preserve it.
But that would mean preserving it as a meditation tradition. Yeah.
I'm going to say yes, but I think they were smart guys. I think they were thinking about how to really preserve it so that it would have its potential, its other potentials.
Hide it, in fact, and conceal it. No?
Maybe. Yeah. This is a difficult thing, right? To look back and really say something historically accurate about it. But theater itself got separated from this golden elixir. And so that enormous number of plays were just we were talking about the continuity being extremely important to movement people, kinesthetic people like us, because that's how knowledge is actually in continuity. It actually comes from the fact that it was developed really well and then added to and refined and added to and refined. It's that continuity that gives its value. It's the junctures, the things where it breaks are important to us, but the continuity is what we really want because that's the value. Otherwise, you're just dealing with something somebody made up right here and now.
Right, but I think before we jump to that second question, because that is the second question, and I think that implies a lot of different continuity of what is really one of the big questions. But to just wrap up, because as I guessed, one question was going to take a long time, and maybe each one of these questions deserves an hour. But just to carry on from how you're describing the Golden Elixir and the 40 years of war in China, and your choice to use the word Golden Elixir now, to sort of repopularize it in a way and to choose it as the term, because it isn't always used in translations, as you say. I've read a lot of different translations, and sometimes some people like or dislike a translator because of their knowledge or not of ritual behavior. And I think that's a very interesting thing. You see a lot in Buddhism. You have scholars of ritual that all they know is text. That's the only thing they know. We were doing a proposal, and we said that these rituals exist by oral transmission. And one of the scholars wanted to change, rituals exist in the instruction manuals. No, they exist in the execution. They don't exist in the instruction manual. But so I just want to, if you can take it forward just to maybe wrap up, although I think I could ask you this question next week and you'd give me a different answer, and it'd be great. Why did you decide to use the Golden Elixir as the best way to kind of go back into this missing history and bring it forward for today's readers of your work, who I'm guessing are mostly people that practice martial arts, would be the most people be naturally interested in what you're doing. But again, how you brought that term forward and the term Golden Elixir forward to discuss in your books, everything from Nusha was an example of the Golden Elixir to what the boxers were doing, and why you chose to use that word in your book. I got to tell you, I had your book on my desk, and I was FaceTiming a good friend in China who was an art historian, and she just burst out giggling. There was so much affection. Why do you have Nusha on your desk? And I was like, I couldn't pronounce it correctly. And I was like, oh yeah, she had so much affection for this deity. It was a very talented young lady from Shanghai. And it was just as you said, Nusha is in the hearts and minds.
Yeah, Naja. I have trouble pronouncing it too. So that's right. He is. It's an amazing thing. The affection has been rekindled. There's hope. But of course, the term, if I say to you in Chinese, you're not a Naja, it means you're not rebellious or frightening to me.
Angry baby.
Yeah. It means a rebel, or it also means somebody who can fight really well. It can have that, that adjective quality. Did I lose the question? I hope
no, not at all. We were talking about, how it was that you wanted to use this term. Popularize the term as a way to facilitate discussion and a way to explain quite a lot of things that you do in your two books.
Yeah. So I think the term that most people have been using is Neidan in English, or inner elixir. And so you don't, if you think of it as inner, as in the body, you're making a mistake. So I wanted to clear that mistake away. I tried saying the Chinese, Jindan. In my first book, I used it a lot, and smart people were coming up to me saying, I don't know, what is Jindan? I still don't get it, And so I thought, okay, I actually need to use an English word. It's a simple answer. It's a practical answer. I also want people to make the connection to the Indian, the Arabic, and the European traditions of the elixir. I think there's a lot to learn there. There's a lot we don't know yet about our own traditions and how they were disrupted, and what we can still connect with from the past. I had some other choices that I ruled out. So Liandan is like the lotus elixir, which, you can see it. So now it's too bright. You can't see it. Let's see. Yeah, there you can see
There you go.
There's the lotus, right?
Right. Well,
his body is made of lotus. Of course, this is a puppet.
Oops. Right. That's why I loved it. Yeah.
The shadow puppet,
yeah.
Made out of skin.
Yeah.
Right? Living skin. So, and that's the story of
my life.
Well, it's also the story of Naja having cut off his own flesh and given it back to his mother and his bones to his father. So I feel like this image is very potent. So the lotus elixir is another name. You also have Jinhua, which is the golden flower, which is a more late Qing dynasty term used. You have oh gosh, there's so many. You even have like Tiedan, like the iron elixir. It was more for like making the body tough, like the Monkey King. You have so there's a lot of different terms, but I think the core one in Chinese language should be Jindan and golden elixir. It works in English. It's tough. I still, there's a lot of explaining to do.
Well, I think that is because we're really, I think, in a way, talking about, whether we like the word esoteric or not, we're talking about empowered movement traditions that the West really lost touch with. So there's not a lot of grounding for Westerners to have automatically in order to get this. And I think in a lot of ways, they also were concealed intentionally over history for different reasons, how you keep these going. So, one of the people I work with is this Newar Nepalese tantric priest whose caste kept it secret for 700 years. And the entire thing is how to divinize the body. That's the entire transformation of the consciousness, by divinizing your entire body. But they kept it secret for a long time. So I think that the term is really useful and does work well. It's not weird English, it's good normal English in a way. And so that allows for a way to address this, this phenomena that's trans-historical, if not linear historicity. There's a trans-historical aspect to it. But again, I interrupted you talking about why you chose this term to discuss this part of missing history.
No, I think I answered it. That's as good as it's going to get.
Okay, well, that's great. That's great, because I think it's very important, and I think this is you're talking about it in terms of Chinese martial arts history and chunks of missing history, and how what we've received, especially in the West, is missing some essential chunks, and those chunks all direct their understanding toward this golden elixir. That's how really Golden Elixir is a way to understand Chinese opera. Just blew open my understanding of Chinese opera. It made so much sense. The same thing with Taoist ritual. Thinking even of Tibetan ritual, which now is missing the military part, but was there for centuries, that these monks did meditation and they did practices and they were fighters. They were all of these things, but now we have a partial history that's artistic and meditational, but they don't talk about the fighting so much. Although there was a lot of fighting, even the monasteries moving to fortress positions from valley positions. The whole thing became a fighting exercise. So I think this is a very helpful tool to talk about these kinds of existing practices.
Yeah. There's that reminds me that so the internal martial arts, right? what happened? Let me just describe what happens. One, there's this enormous amount of magic stuff. And so when you put on what I call the YMCA glasses, or the filter that the 20th century created, where you separate the Golden Elixir theater and martial skills, what you see is all these superstitious practices that don't have any value. They're magic tricks. And what do you need magic tricks for if you're just fighting, right? And so, but if you take off the glasses, you're like, well, what's motivating them? Why did they create these things? How did they create them? Because they're cool magic tricks. Like, for instance, I figured this one out recently, where I can stand there and my students can push on my third eye. Like, they can push as hard as they want and they can't move me. And then I blast them and they fly back, and it's like, I mean, I could have convinced a whole village to like take up arms. I'm going to empower you, to take up arms against these bandits who you outnumber, but are just afraid of, and this happened historically. We know this happened. And so these magic tricks had a real purpose, but they were also used by actors who were low caste, and were often treated really poorly, to make money off of the rich guys. You could say they would develop these relationships and they go, I have a trick, I have so much chi, you should study with me. And I look at what I can do, all these magic tricks. I can with one finger, I can control you and make you sit on the ground. Look, and and they do it. And you're like, whoa, how did you do it? So these magic tricks are all constructed around the Golden Elixir. And they go, how did we get from visualization to these superpowers? And so that's part of it, is that once I had that conceptualization, I started figuring this stuff out. And what happens when you have what I call the reversal of perception, action, ordering, is you start to move differently and things keep changing and keep reversing. So when I'm teaching this stuff, it's very weird. I'm like, do this, and okay, now do the opposite, and like you get it, okay, you got that? Now don't do that at all, or can you imagine you're doing that upside down now, stuff like that. And I'm like, here's a test, to see if you're really doing it upside down, stuff like that. That is it sounds intangible and mysterious, but it's all based on this idea of the Golden Elixir reversals. And this practice of the Golden Elixir has spontaneously changed my body, give it enormous integrity, and allowed me to see, you could say, to see physics that other people don't see. It's because normal people are in a social realm where they're like, I'm going to get you, right? And when you, again, going back to Wu Wei, when you completely drop that, you start to Zi Wei, see things as they actually are. And when you can see things they actually are, and the other person can't, you can do magic tricks. And so the Golden Elixir, Taoism itself, Golden Elixir as a view, actually produces a method which has some of its fruition. They're called siddhis in Sanskrit, right? They're magic powers, right? Yeah. And the Dao De Jing is very clear. Ignore these. Like, that's the flower, not the fruit, right? And I do, for the most part. So I take them very lightly. In fact, one of the reasons I wrote this book is because people take them too seriously. I want them to be in context.
The terms that I have heard magic and sorcery described well, that's helped me look at experiences that I've had in my travels, in the Himalayas particularly, is magic is the control of nature. You can control nature. So you bring down the mystic from the cave to keep it from raining during the festival. And that's his whole job, is just to keep it from raining. And also, when you meet them, I've met them on a couple of occasions, they just don't know why you think it's a big deal. They really don't know. They have long hair, nobody else does, and they usually think you want to see their hair. But they just don't get, or not sleeping for 3 weeks. They just don't know why you think that's interesting. For them, it's just something to do. But magic being the control of nature, and sorcery being the creation of something that wasn't there before. That you create a deity, you create a figure, you create a something, that the sorcery is about giving being to something that wasn't there before, and magic is controlling nature. So your ability to, see physics that other people don't see is very much a kind of controlling nature, or ability to manipulate nature, so that magic is genuine. It's not. It's a term we use for something not mundane, but in fact, it's an actual thing. Do those definitions of magic controlling nature and sorcery being something that adds a new being sit with you?
Yeah, I like it. I think we're in a this is a very long conversation that I don't know the end of, right? I think we're at the beginning of something, because I mean, there's a reason that there was a good reason Christians gave up sorcery and magic, right? There was a good reason for giving it up, and that's that when you blame sorcery for the drought, you end up burning a witch,
But is this not when the Boxer Rebellion fails, you say Golden Elixir has no power? Is that not a kind of parallel thing?
It is. It is. And I say that at the end of my book. I say that, look, something here had to end, right? We need to look at this from, we needed
a historical break.
Yeah, we need a historical break in order to have the continuity.
That's what I think the whole point. Now, we are almost at an hour and 15 minutes, and we got pretty much through question 1. So I suggest we do this again and do question 2. I thought this was a really, really good exchange and really wonderful answers that I had to questions regarding your book. And as I say, I really admire your book. And I will confess my ulterior motive. My ulterior motive is that I'm doing this project with this 1,000-year-old monastery that has a 3-dimensional mandala within it that dates to 1042. And this mandala of Vajradhatu is a bunch of deities. It's 37 unique deities making 37 unique hand gestures. And the abbot of the monastery asked us to document it. And the greatest scholars of this site are essentially art historians who think it's bullshit to even look at the ritual at all. They think it's postmodern madness. It's been invented. And anybody who practices a movement tradition, a meditation tradition, or is in a transmitted tradition, would first of all say that's not what anybody who devotes their life, that's not how they behave. They wouldn't do that. There's no integrity to it. But secondly, after our conversation today, I'm really sort of intrigued by the idea that, if it's a self-arising thing, the point isn't that you give it to me and I give it to somebody else. The point is it happens to you and it happens to me. And that's the only point of transmission. So it can skip a generation. It can skip anything it wants as long as it affects that result in the people who are doing the practice. And so with the Dalai Lama reintroducing this ancient practice, but he got it from somebody else. And so I want to be able to discuss the validity, you might say, as it were, of the actualization process of the monks who still are practicing this ritual in this mandala, however it was brought to them. And we're going to try to see, and that's our next couple of questions that I have for you, like how do we go backwards? How do we look backwards in a movement tradition? Well, I think you've done more of it than a lot of people have, because you really are as much a practitioner as you are a historian. And there's not very many people that are really both of those things. And so I want to be able to talk more about the reality of that. And what's puzzling and how we're developing our project is that while you got to Tabo in the Western Tibet in the 10th, 11th century, got to Japan in the 9th century. It was in Nepal in the 5th and 6th century. And it was in Java, at least by the 8th century. So actually the Tibetans got it kind of late, although it probably has an Indian source of these types of practices. It went to Japan, it went to Java, it probably was started they say the oldest known Buddhist practices are the Nepalese, the Newar. And they are very much a means to do pretty much what you've been describing today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am wondering about being able to present this to a lot of other different disciplines. And also be able to invite their observations, welcome them, and bring the point of view of the practitioner, bring the point of view of the living ritual, the extant ritual over centuries. And you've helped me a lot to understand your book better, and you've helped me to probe my own questions, but I wanted you to know what they were, so maybe they'll sit on one of your back burners. and
They're cooking. They're cooking back there.
and cook on one of your back burners. So do you have any closing things to say? I think we'll do it again, and then we'll go to question 2 next time we meet.
The only thing, well, thank you so much. You're a great interviewer, and I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed talking to you, and I enjoy the opportunity, to really just spontaneously talk about this. And the other thing I want to say, I kind of just want to thank my fans, because it's a strange thing that's been happening to me is that, like, once or twice a week I get a letter from someone who's read my books and says something like, something big has changed in my practice. Something that was really meaningful to me is now more meaningful to me because the stories fit. The stories are fitting, and I just wanted to let you know that this is really valuable to me.
That's how I contacted you. I would say I discovered your book. You know what I mean? I wasn't looking for it when I found it.
It's self-arising. Yeah.
I discovered your book. But I agree. And I think this place of, the fact that there's a community of people that are finding meaning and meaning to questions they've had for a while or didn't know. You have such a clear, comprehensive, coherent context for how you develop these thoughts that now I can see a lot of the back engineering to your books. And I don't think very many people do have this comprehensive understanding of it, even Chinese language and your ability to communicate with scholars as you do. So I'm one of those people that discovered your book and found meaning in it and meaning in my own practice. But that's a great audience to have. And it's one that I hope this interview will reach more people and will help people more into your wonderful ideas about movement and the Golden Elixir.
And your project. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you. I at some point I want to drag you into our project and put you with some of these other people just to hear what they have to say. I think it would be just really, really interesting. So.